This is the last archival upload of my previous mix critique videos. Everything after this point will be a fresh upload. But again, I apologize for the vertical format this video is about to switch to. This is 361 to 365. This mix was sent in by Lucas. So far, this was a really long intro, but it was a lot better than most, and the rest of you should take note of this, because even though it was kind of a long build and he was adding a new element with each repetition, all of the new elements were different. They were unique. They were like at least interesting enough to keep my attention. Other than that, you specifically asked about your track being muddy. You have way too much going on in the subs, like down at like 30, 40 hertz. It's just, you have a bunch of sub frequency there. The other thing is mud is usually too much low end or specifically too much low mids. I don't think that's really the problem here. I think the problem here is you have no top end. Like the only top end is the drums when they finally come in, and there's no top end in any of the other things. It's like you piled on a bunch of different sub heavy instruments without adding anything to balance it out on the top end. So that's why it sounds muddy. The whole track sounds dark because there's no top end. Yeah, man, that's the biggest thing, is overall it just sounds really dark because you have so much sub information and barely any top end. So you just gotta bring the subs down a little, so that's everything below like 60 hertz. Then you just need to add other elements that have a lot more top end to balance out the massive wall of low end you have here. This mix was sent in by Dominic. Okay, dude, your low end is seriously lacking. Like, you have a good amount of low end in the bass, but the bass is mixed too low to the point that that's not really adding enough to the low end. And then your kick drum is definitely loud enough, but there's no low end whatsoever in the kick drum. If there is, it's just sub frequencies, like below 50 hertz. Like, there's not really anything in the like 50 to 250, 300 hertz range where I would expect a good full low end from the kick drum. Also, your guitar, it's a little far in the background, so it's not totally ruining everything, but it's definitely been gutted. Like, you clearly have thinned out that guitar way too much.
And you get lost in the thoughts of old, a gray I know, a gray that's cold.
All right, the vocals sound pretty solid, but they're not really blending in with everything. Honestly, dude, it feels like you just scooped the mids and everything. Like, it feels like a typical smiley face EQ in all the instrumentals. And then the vocals, you didn't overprocess them, which is good. And the vocals on their own sound good, but the vocals just don't feel like they're blending in because the mid-range has been gutted in all the instruments. The low mids is like the biggest problem. That feels really lacking. Like, that's where a lot of the energy in your track is gonna come from, and it's just empty. This mix was sent in by Dino. Okay, this bass in the intro is super sloppy. Like, you can hear that the bass is hitting a bunch of notes that it's not meaning to hit. Like, you're accidentally whacking open strings in between all the actual notes. It sounds super, super sloppy. Also, when you hit those lowest notes on the bass, your strings are just flapping in the breeze. Like, there's clearly not enough tension for whatever tuning you're using right here. All right, the guitar tone sounds good, but the balance on everything is off. The guitar's too far in the front. The drums are a little too far in the back. You're missing a lot of low end in the snare. And then it sounds like you didn't cut enough of those low mids out of the kick. It sounds a little flabby and gross. Like, it's not really giving me that like steady low end punch that I want from a kick drum, because it has all that extra mid range that just doesn't sound good here. So if you got those things right, it'd be great, but the bass tone still kind of sounds like shit because of those strings are like just flapping all over the place, man. You gotta get your bass set up right, because especially for anything heavy, the bass tone is really, really important to the guitar tone. So when you have a pretty good guitar tone, but then the bass tone just sounds like shit, simply because the bass wasn't set up properly and you didn't use the right strings for your tuning, like, it's just ruining it for me. This mix was sent in by Null No. Dude, you asked if this was too loud. I can already tell by looking at it that it's too loud, so I'm gonna turn my monitors down so I don't go deaf. Anyone watching this, I highly recommend you turn your volume down too, or at least take your headphones out. Yeah, dude, I had to turn my monitors down a full 10 dB from where I would normally listen to the mix critiques at so that this was at a comfortable volume. It's way too loud. Yeah, dude, you're hitting like positive 0.4 true peak. Like, you should not be going over 0 true peak. And you're hitting like -4 LUFS. Like, this is way too loud. And it's like, it's not distorting as much as I would normally expect something this loud to distort, but it is distorting. Like, you gotta back this down, man. Honestly, what I would do is before exporting it, just turn down your master fader and see how that works. Because whatever processing you have on it is probably okay. There's a chance you're clipping some of the plugins that you're running through, but like more than anything, I think it's just clipping the output on the way out of the DAW. So if you just turn down the master fader by like 2 dB, then you should be fine. It might still clip a little bit. It might still distort a little bit. So you might actually have to tweak the processing. But like overall, that's the biggest problem. Is just this is way too loud. Like I said, I had to turn my monitors down by like 10 dB. This mix was sent in by Preston. All right, dude, this mix is also too loud, just like the last one. Different reasons, though. You definitely pushed it a little too far in the master overall. It's starting to distort a little bit. You're like right on the edge of actually clipping. You're like at 0 true peak, but like it's still distorting a little bit. And really, I think the biggest reason for that is just how much you pushed the high mids overall. Like from like 1 to 3K, you've just like cranked that whole frequency area. And that's the frequency range that humans are like most sensitive to, is in like the 1 to 5K, and usually 3K is really painful. So if you're pushing those frequencies a lot, it feels a lot louder than it actually is, even when you're looking at the meters. So when you look at your meters with this mix, you're at 0 true peak. But because there's such an overwhelming amount of those high mids, it feels a lot louder and it starts to feel painful to the human ear. So like that's something you need to be conscious of. You can't push the high mids that much. It feels like a mostly decent mix. You might have scooped a little too much out of the mid-range. It feels a little scooped to me, but maybe if it had vocals on top of it, then that would fill that out well enough. But just overall, you pushed it too far, man, especially because there's so much high mid frequency. Like you gotta back the volume down a little bit.